Good evening, brothers and sisters, and welcome to another edition of Everyday Faith. I'm your host, Eric Chen. Today we have another amazing episode, but first, we would like to remember the life of President Lee, former President Lee of Taiwan, Li Denghui, and will always be remembered as the one who transitioned Taiwan to go from a dictatorship to a democracy. He served as the vice president of Taiwan under Jiang Jingguo, and he passed away. So Alex, can you cue up the article?
Yes, we can.
And he, 97 years old. He was the first Taiwan-born president of Taiwan. The first there he is, and he actually went to Cornell. He had a PhD from Cornell. He also studied agriculture at the Kyoto Imperial University. And there he is, he dies at 97. So Li Denghui 总统, President Lee, Dr. Lee, President Lee, thank you for your contribution to democracy in Taiwan, your contribution to humanity. Rest in peace. Now, what many people don't know is that President Lee was a member of the Presbyterian Church. And the Presbyterian Church was very pivotal in forming and shaping the democratic movement in Taiwan. In fact, when Taiwan was under the dictatorship of President Jiang, they're the ones that were organizing and mobilizing in churches and their homes, and they're the ones that made one of the greatest contributions to the democratic movement within Taiwan. And on that note, and on that theme, we have a special guest whose family hails from Taiwan, another fellow Taiwanese-American, just like myself. So without further ado, welcome, Faye, the Lone Star Warrior Ku.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Yes, and for those who don't know, Faye is an educator. She is a mother. She is an activist and an aspiring author. Isn't that right?
I guess so.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're gonna get to your soon to be published work in today's episode.
I see.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, especially kind of the family history, how, from what I understand, your family immigrated from China to Taiwan. Is that right?
Right. So my family on my dad's side is from Shanghai area.
Oh,
and
right.
my mom
Shanghai.
Ala Shanghai. Yeah. and my mom on my mom's side, my grandparents were from Anhui Shen.
Oh.
So yeah.
Very ancient city.
So the two families met in Taiwan, and they got together and had me, and I was their only child. So, but wow. I brought you a show and tell of my father's side of the family because
awesome.
We had a big reunion. So let me show you.
Okay. Oh wow.
We had a reunion a while back, and this is my father and his family. These are all his siblings that were still surviving in 1999, I think.
Okay, so these pictures are from 1999?
These are from 1999. We had one big family reunion that my eldest aunt, who has passed now, put together because Taiwanese people could finally go back, right, to Shanghai. And she had bought a place and that had like 3 bedrooms. And she said, everybody's going to come and visit, and we're going to actually sit down to dinner together for the first time in 50 years. So these are all siblings.
Right. Wow.
My grandmother had 5.
And that's actually one of...
Yeah. And my grandmother, that side of my family was Catholic. So they lived
Oh, wow.
close to the Catholic church that was built very close to them. Like they were landowners, so they were wealthy. And my grandfather and my grandmother were both sent to they were both sent to no, Catholic school. No, Catholic school.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so I actually went to Catholic school because they had so much money. My grandparents, my dad's father's side of the family were very wealthy, and so was my grandmother. So they were, they would send them to the best school, the private school at the Catholic school, and it was a new thing at the time, but that's how they met.
Wow.
The boys and the girls were separated from each other in the Catholic school. So my grandfather looked over the courtyard and saw my grandmother on the other side and said, "That's the one." He picked out like the prettiest one. "That's the one I want." And she was like 1 year older than him. So it was like quite the scandal at the time. So
actually, my grandma was 2 years older than my grandfather. And that was, she was 23 and he was 21.
Right.
And so back at that time, 23 was already over the hill because most people, especially too old. Most females got married at 15 through 18. So when you're 23, you're leftover, as they used to say.
Right. And is your family also from Shanghai?
My family, well, I have two sides of my family. My family on my mom's side is from Guangzhou.
Okay.
And they're Hakka.
Okay.
Actually.
Okay.
So he came with Jiang Jieshi, Chiang Kai-shek, and he was part of the military that was fighting against the Japanese occupation. Now, on my dad's side, they immigrated from China. That's with two Ks, Hakka, from China to Taiwan in 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was written. So on my dad's side, I am 9th generation Taiwanese.
Okay, very nice. So, you have
and
two different histories also that joined together in Taiwan.
Yeah, so was there any personality conflicts from being on your family? One's from Anhui and Shanghai. Were there any conflicts because of that?
Maybe some. I don't really know, but I think my father's side was more, like gentry when they came. They were used to having a lot of money, and so the story from that side was, my grandmother didn't want my grandfather because my grandfather was too much of a womanizer. Because his entire family was known for having many children. No, not many children, many wives, multiple wives. Because if you could afford it, you would have multiple wives, and they could certainly afford it. So, but they were being taught in Catholic school a whole new way of thinking, right? And so the Catholic nuns would teach them that you can only have one spouse. It was one man to one woman. So this is a new way of thinking, though, for that generation. And my grandmother made my grandfather a promise that he was only ever going to marry her. And he said, okay. So that was the only way she agreed to get married. And then, but he thought of it a different way. Like he wasn't going to marry the girl, but he was still going to have still enjoy his women. So that was a little different.
Well, actually, my family had very similar history on my dad's side. My great-grandfather had 3 different wives.
Okay.
And my grandma, because my grandfather, he was a very handsome looking young man, and there are many suitors interested. And even when I go back to the hometown, they all remembered him as the handsome young man. And my grandmother was very insecure. So she made him promise. She said that, you're going to have all these options and all these women coming after you. How do I know you're going to be faithful to me? So he basically swore to heaven that he would never have another wife. Right.
So we have a whole, different set of ideas. And by the time so they ended up having to go to Taiwan because they were so wealthy that at the time, wealthy people had to go. They were going to have all their stuff taken from them, and they might go to jail or something worse could happen to them. So they went to Taiwan, and the story is that my grandmother was pregnant with my father. Oh no, she had my father and she was pregnant with my uncle. So it was really hard for her to just had those two with her in Taiwan. So she was pregnant with my father, who was very young, like maybe 2, still like throwing plates when he goes to restaurants. And when they got to Taiwan, they were like, life is really hard here. But they had left behind like all their other kids. That five girls had been left behind. And they didn't realize that, when the revolution came, or counter-revolution, or whatever you call it at the time, that a political curtain would come down and they would not be able to see their children, I think. So it just happened so quickly. And so when they got there, they were like not used to having no servants and stuff. And they asked, they sent a ticket for a servant girl to come and visit them and serve them in Taiwan. And the servant girl got the ticket and she's like, so they sent one ticket. What about my husband? What about my family? And she was like, there's no way I'm going to go to Taiwan, So my
right. What about the family? Yeah. What about the rest of the family? Yeah, exactly.
My eldest aunt took that ticket. She was 14. She said, I'm going to go see my parents. If they need a servant girl, I'll come. I want to be with my parents. And so she was the only girl that made it to Taiwan. The other 4 girls got left behind with different uncles. And they were all separated by the time of this reunion. Like we had one that lived all the way in Macau because the uncle went with her there. Another one lived in, what is that, far west, Lanzhou. And she took 36 hours by the slow train to get to Shanghai for the reunion. Longer than me, who had to cross the ocean.
Wow.
And then, and then there were two aunts who were with different uncles across the Huangpujiang. So one on the
mainland.
One on Fuxi, one on Pudong. So one was on the east side of the river and one was on the west side of the river. And so they hardly ever saw each other either. So it's like just too hard to cross the river every day to visit people.
Well, that kind of actually goes back to President Li Tenghui 总统, former President Li, because he's the one that implemented the policy of reunification. Because prior to that, it was martial law, it was the communists are the devils. And after he came into power, he said, it's time for reunification. Actually, my grandfather, he also went back, and he actually had to leave his wife. I think for some whatever reason, he left his wife in, he couldn't bring her to Taiwan, and she had remarried. So
yeah.
That was pretty interesting. But now I wanted to touch on what you shared about the Catholic Church and your faith. So how did going to Catholic Church kind of shape your worldview, or where do you, how do you identify yourself spiritually?
Okay, well, because I sort of see the Catholic Church as being sort of a colonial influence. So I kind of have learned a lot about different the way it used to be, then the traditional faiths from my maternal grandparents. And so they kind of practice just traditional Buddhist style practices. And I also learned about Christianity and Catholicism because of living in the United States. And I would go to the Catholic Church with my grandmother. She always had her prayer beads with her all the time. And so like living in all these different types, I was just kind of like, well, I don't really believe in this one or this one or this one as being the absolute truth. And so, for example, so I just feel like over time, I just developed a different kind of faith. So I found Pastafarianism, and I find that to be really perfect for me because I think my stepmom, because my parents got divorced. So my stepmom actually raised me. And
wow.
She's always said, like wherever you go, just bye-bye, just follow whatever. In Taiwan, there's all sorts of different religions converging in the same place. And most Taiwanese people are like, just be respectful. Whatever you believe is fine, but then whatever they believe is also good. So if you're in this church, if you're in this mosque or a temple, just do what everybody else is doing and be respectful. So I like to worship with people when they invite me to whatever they're doing. So.
Right. Well, that was one of the beautiful things about Taiwan, is that there was a level of religious freedom. So you're free to be Buddhist, Taoist, folk religion, Protestant, Catholic, and it seems like you had kind of a wide variety of experiences.
Yeah, and Pastafarianism is just a created religion. It's absolutely just made up, but what it does, it's about trying not to be dogmatic. So I feel like a lot of religions get in trouble because they say, well, the literal meaning of this book is what we have to follow. When in fact, I think all religions are really about how to be a good person, how to figure out what's right and what's wrong. It helps you to make decisions, and it helps you to have strength in the face of, terrible, terrifying circumstances, beyond your control. Those are things that people really need in their life. And I think all different kinds of spiritual practices can give you that. But I think, sometimes they go wrong when they say only I'm right and you're wrong. And I feel like that's when you start the warfare and the, all sorts of.
Well, that's the greatest. Well, that's the greatest irony, right? Is that most religions, they're about love and peace and treating others the right way and a moral vision of society. But the oxymoron and the irony is that different religions, different nations end up fighting wars over religion. In fact, even Christianity, Protestants and Catholics fought the 30 Years' War. So even the same faith fought over wars. And of course, there's the Crusades, and the war on terrorism is also Islam versus Christianity. When in fact, like you said, in a sense, we are all about peace, which that's what we would hope that religion should be about, pursuing a peaceful way of life. And it's unfortunate that it has come to that. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's what I feel like. I feel like when you don't practice religion whatsoever, you do miss out on some things. You miss out on some very beautiful music. You miss out on, taking care of people together, because a lot of people perform their, do philanthropy or giving or caring in that setting. You miss out on prayer, or sort of, talking to each other about things that are very personal and intimate in a certain type of setting. I mean, there's a lot of things that you would miss out on. But then at the same time, and I feel like that people need explanations for things that they don't understand. So it's a way of doing that together. But then if you take
there's that communal aspect, right? Community aspect of religion, right?
Yeah. And there's a building of trust between people, because you're like, okay, I believe this and you believe it too, so that's good. But then if you say people who don't believe what I believe, all of a sudden are the bad ones. They're the other, right? Then the creation of these different groups causes all sorts of problems, which I think needs to be some way to deal with it. And I think that Pastafarianism deals with it in a great way. What it does is it injects humor into these situations. So when people get a little too much, into like their particular, specific beliefs, when it's too narrow, then Pastafarianism comes in and says, wait a minute. Don't you find this to be a little humorous? There might be a little bit, you might be taking it a little too far. So, yeah. And it's also
that's interesting, because I think there's a very, right. And I think that's a lot of, if you think about it, all of these ideas that you're talking about have very strong political implications in terms of not judging, not seeing the other as the other and not belonging, because in a sense, we are all part of the same humanity. And that kind of brings us to the next very controversial topic of right now, Taiwan, Hong Kong, China. And I know that in our conversations, you shared with me that oftentimes the Western media has not always been fair in its portrayal of China. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about it, because it's very important to me not to get into wars, between the world's biggest economy and the second biggest economy. I think that's too much. You know, two giant groups of people trying to create conflict because they're making propaganda about each other is going to be a big problem for all of the humans on our planet.
Yeah, I mean, if we go into war, if we
every day now.
Yeah, I mean, if we go into World War III, that's not a future I want to be a part of.
Yeah, or even a Cold War again. Like, we just got out of that, and we should have learned not to do that again. And it seems like our politicians are trying to, you know, divert attention from the problems that we have here and the mistakes that we've made, you know, and just saying we're going to, you know, blame it on somebody else and then see if our people will just, you know, go with that and say, well, you know, if we just blame it all on someone else, then we don't have to deal with our problems. So I see a lot of I think it's easy to blame things on people that you don't understand, right? And so if we don't speak the same language and we don't share the same internet group, so YouTube never shows me anything from China. And we talk a lot about the Great Firewall of China not allowing, you know, outside news into China. But actually, we have the same thing here. I wrote an article for
Andrew. Algorithm.
Yeah.
Well, you know, over there it's called a firewall, and over here we call it the algorithm.
Yeah. I mean, here you'd have to try really hard. Okay, like if you want to Google my article that I wrote for Andrew Yang, and I put it on, I gave it to a friend of mine who's Canadian and lives in Taiwan to put on his website, because I thought, you know, there might be some people in Taiwan who are interested in a person of Taiwanese ancestry, you know, running for president of the United States. So I thought it'd be nice if they have some articles too. Well, but if somebody in the United States wanted to read my article and they try to Google it, they won't be able to find it. So, you know, even if I give you the exact title, you can't find it. And then you'd have to go somewhere into the Google settings and change it into Taiwanese region. Maybe you could find it. It's like that difficult. So if you think back, you know, to what you've been offered by YouTube or what you've been offered by Facebook, have you ever been offered a single pro-China, you know, and by pro-China, just it doesn't mean you love China's government. It means, you know, an article or a video that shows China as being possibly just an equal to the United States in terms of human rights or something else. Or, you know, maybe their government also works. Maybe there's good things about them. There's good and there's positive and negative aspects of their country, just like ours. You know.
Well, actually, that reminds me of it.
Yeah,
that reminds me of a Facebook post that my friend shared, Isaac. He said that, you know, growing up, he used to watch CCTV, and they would talk about all the infrastructure that the government was building. And in that respect, if you look at China, they've been incredible with their infrastructure, the high-speed rails, the infrastructure, the electricity grid, the logistical infrastructure, shipping. It's quite an accomplishment if you think about where they've come from.
Yeah, but we don't know about their accomplishments here because we're not offered this information anywhere in the big news media outlets. And if you go to YouTube and you watch shows there, you will never be offered anything. You'll never be offered anything by Facebook unless you actively seek it out. And so that's what I've been telling people lately is, if you've never been offered a single pro-China thing, let's give you a few, and then let's hit the like or subscribe. And then that way you'll occasionally maybe get one, you know, and that will balance out your view of other places. Same thing with Russia. You know, if you see the government demonizing Russia, maybe you should, you know, give yourself 2 or 3 pro-Russia, okay, outlets and give it a chance. You may not agree with them, but at least you get a chance to see how do they see it. And I think that for Chinese people who live in China, because I have family there, you know, they're pretty happy with their government in many ways. And they're very proud for very good reasons, because they've lifted a lot of people out of poverty. They've done some amazing building. I mean, there's amazing buildings there that we've never seen, although all of us could probably imagine what the Sydney Opera House looks like, or we know what Big Ben looks like in London. Very few of us actually know what Shanghai looks like. Or what about Taipei 101? Taipei is not even China, right? So Taipei is very pro-American, and they're very brainwashed there too, because from the time I was little living in Taiwan, I celebrated American holidays. I listened to American or Western like children's music. I read, fairy tales the same as American children. These are not things that they do in China. So I know that Chinese people are getting a whole complete different education than me when I was growing up. But even in Taiwan, they have the Taipei 101. What do you have the tallest building in the world for if nobody knows about it? And literally nobody in the United States even knew about the Taipei 101, not even the people who built it. Because I met engineers in Washington State who were on the project. They were engineering the earthquake-proof aspect of it, right? They had provided the engineering for that. And when I told them about Taipei 101, they were like, "Oh, is that the name of the building?" Because they had like a secret project name for it. And they never occurred to them to find out what the actual name of it was at the end of the project. So it's like,
Well, that's the thing is that. Well, that's the thing is that it's always very easy to have a binary, because that's so easy on the mind. Like China, bad, U.S. good, right? When reality is much more complex, there are many negative aspects of China, but there's also many positives. So we can't just say, okay, China, human rights abuse, Communist Party, all bad, right? Because just like, well, in a sense, what you're talking about in terms of looking at things from all sides, just like here in the US, we can't assume that, okay, if you're a liberal, you can't just assume that every liberal position is the right position. And similarly, if you're a conservative, it's hubris to think that every conservative position is the right position. Right. If we could apply it to the situation in China versus US versus Taiwan, well, what's to say that the US position on China is always the right position? And what's to say that the Chinese position on US and Taiwan is the right position? I think the truth is somewhere in between, between the lines. The truth is within that nuance, and it's hard to see the nuance.
Yes, and it's especially hard if you're only offered one viewpoint. And it's and so I'm just encouraging people to seek out the other viewpoint, and give it a try, and think about what you've been hearing. Does it make sense? And think about dates. Like when we talk about human rights abuses in China, we talk about specific things. Check out if those specific things are correct. Like, yes, something did happen in when was Tiananmen Square? Was it in the 1990s?
1989.
Okay. But we always talk about 1989 as if nothing else has happened in China. Perhaps people in China also agree that that was an egregious thing to have happened in their country. And that's it. They don't want to do that again. And I've seen that they have not done that in Hong Kong. I've seen that. I see that for hundreds of days, they've tried to keep it as peaceful as possible on the side of the police. That's what I see. And I don't hear that reported.
And that's another hot topic, but that's another conversation altogether, Hong Kong. But I want to get to the juiciest topic, which is after your family moved here, and from the flyer picture, you have a amazing son, Zephyr, and he schooled me in the campaign.
That was pretty cool.
Showing me, he would he would approach people. Like if I approach one person to talk about Andrew Yang, he approached like 3 people, and I couldn't keep up. And keep in mind, most people have a hard time keeping up with me. So for me to say I could not keep up with him, I'm not just saying that because I'm saying that.
Right, you're very high energy, and Zephyr was gonna outdo you that day. I remember.
Yeah, I seriously, I tried to keep up and I could not. Now, which brings us to the next topic, and that is your time in prison. You said that you wrote some letters to your children. Yep. What's the backstory? That's intense.
Oh, okay. Well, I took all 3 of my children, because I have 3 children. The one you met is my youngest, who is now 6. He was probably 5 when you met him. And he has 2 older brothers, okay? They're half brothers because they're from a different father. And my 2 older children, I took with me along with the little ones. So all 3 of them, I took them to Mexico, but without the 2 older children's father's permission. And the reason is I was already being legally tortured, basically, the way I see it. I was already being prevented from being with my children because there was a prior incident when he prevented me from going to Taiwan with my children. But in that case, I actually had every right to do it. We actually had a parenting plan that specified that I did not need to ask him for permission if I was leaving the country, and I did not even need to notify him. And in that year, if we had a disagreement, I had the right to make the decision. So I was allowed to take, vacation with the children, but this country has a bias for control. So hi Vincent. So when the child was when I was going to Taiwan, I was pregnant with Zephyr. And the reason I had to go to Taiwan to live there is because I was going to go ahead and give birth in Taiwan. And I needed 6 months to qualify for universal health. So I needed to go immediately. I couldn't just wait, when I found out and decided I was going to move to Taiwan. So that was the year that we were talking about Obamacare around here. And everybody was talking about how terrible universal health was. And I was like, are you kidding me? I'm enjoying it so much. If I had stayed in the United States, it could have cost $20,000 for a cesarean section, which is, I was definitely going to have a C-section because it was my third child. So when I was,
how much did it cost you
in Taiwan?
Yes.
Maybe 2,000.
Oh wow.
Maybe 2,000 because and that was I did qualify for the universal health care, and every time I paid, I learned so much about universal health care there. I would love to have a discussion with you sometime again just to talk about the
that's another topic, but let's stick to the juicy topic, and that is, I mean, how long did you end up in prison? And I know you wrote letters to your children. What was that all about?
So I ended up going to Mexico with my children because I had come back from Taiwan to fight the court case, the first court case. And then I wrote an 85-page appeal to that court case because they were still having me professionally supervised and then amateur supervised, which didn't make any sense. So I was constantly being kept from the children, basically. So I felt like this situation was untenable. There was no way to end this. It would have to be David ending it, and he was not likely to do that. So I ended up taking all 3 kids to Mexico, and they brought me back after 5 months of living in Mazatlan, and they put me in jail, gave the 2 older kids back to the dad, and they sent my youngest to foster care. So while I was in jail, let me show you some pictures from Mexico. Anyway. This was us going to, this was Zephyr when he was a baby. He was probably 1 in this picture, or 2. And we went to the Children's Museum. The Children's Museum in Mexico City at some point. We took a trip. There's his older brother back there, Sage. And there's Isaac. There's Isaac.
Wow.
They're playing at the Children's Museum there. The Papalote. And there's Sage loving on his brother. And there's Sage with a real lion on his lap at the African safari at the zoo over in Puebla. So we took a little.
Oh my goodness! A real lion?
That's a real lion. Yeah. And Isaac was not wanting the lion on his lap at all, and I was surprised that Sage was willing to do it because he's usually, he's kind of afraid of things.
Now tell me about the letters that you wrote.
But I wrote 1 letter every week to my children for a long time. And I had first started, and I was in the MDCLA, which is the Metropolitan Detention Center in Los Angeles. And these are all the letters that I wrote to them. I wrote a 3-page letter to them by typing. Is that right? 3 pages of typing every time. Let me see. Wow. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Yeah, every week that I could get to the what they called the law library in jail. And the law library didn't have any books in it, but it did have typewriters. So I would go down to the typewriter and I would just type out letters. And I got letters from the boys occasionally. So here are some of the letters that I got from them. And I got some of the letters I got later. So the last letter I got from my boys.
And one day, and one day I'm gonna speak this into reality, and one day all of these will be published, and it will be one of the most incredible stories out there. And
I hope so, 'cause
so
this is
anyone
the
who's watching, if you're a publisher, if you have experience, yeah, and anyone who's out there, if you have experience publishing, if you know how to publish, how can people reach you? Your Twitter handle, Alex, put the Twitter handle on the bottom here. She's got an amazing story that would take an episode all on its own.
Whoops. This was illustrated for Zephyr, but it took me so long to write it that I finally came out and I said I'm just going to hold on to it because I didn't know how to copy this right in the jail, and I didn't have to, and I was afraid to lose it. And I got so tired of drawing out our whole story that I actually enlisted one of my friends in the jail to do it for me. Her name is Kristina Gerasimova, and she's in Russia again. She's gone home to Russia. But she did some of these drawings like these. I got tired and I was like, I'm never going to finish this and I really need to. And she would help me.
Yeah.
So,
well,
it's our last page.
Wow. Well, there you go. That's amazing. And I think again, for those of you who want to know more about the story, because this whole sequence, okay, of books and drawings, that is an episode all on its own. This is just the appetizer. So if you would like to know more, if you would like to help Faye make this dream into a reality, to be able to share her story as a mother going through the legal system, trying to protect her children, as an Asian American mother, Taiwanese American mother, and all the hurdles she had to jump through, reach out to her on Twitter, Palestine Math. And, I think I speak that into being that you're an aspiring author, and very soon it will be published, probably, I would say, within a year from now. So I want to, yeah. Well, we're going to wrap things.
Can I give you like a couple of little background things in terms of what I did in jail that was different?
Well, unfortunately, we're actually running out of time. But that could be another episode, the future episode. But why don't you leave us with your parting words of wisdom, if you will, kind of as a hook, as a cliffhanger for next time.
Oh, cliffhanger. Well, I don't know about the wisdom right now, but I think if I had one last thing to say, I would say that when I was at MDC LA, I was the only prisoner that was allowed to go to my children's court hearing by the judge. The federal judge ordered the federal marshals to take me. Otherwise, you can't go. But in California, most parents who are in jail in the California system, they're required to listen to California judges. So if the California judge asks you to go to court for your children, you're transported. When you're in the federal system, you're labeled federal property and you're not allowed to go. So in 20-something years of that prison being that jail being there, I was the only one that was allowed to go. So hopefully, I was the first one.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of a very heavy subject in and of itself. So we're gonna have to bring you back on because again, your book is, it's a book, so it deserves its own episode. This is just the appetizer for next time. This is just a setup for the sequel. So I want to thank you again, Faye. Yeah.
Me in jail, graduating from my parenting class. I took a
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your time, and that we're able to hear a little bit about your backstory. And I'm gonna bring you back next time for the juicy story. We talk more about, or we focus more on kind of the Taiwanese aspect, Taiwan, Hong Kong, China. The next time we're gonna focus on motherhood. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds good. This is on my neighbor kids in Mexico where we lived.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go.
All right.
Do you speak Spanish?
Un poquito.
A little bit? Un poco? Un poco?
Sí.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Faye.
All right.
I'll be in touch with you, and we're going to do another episode later on. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. All right. All right. Well, what an incredible journey. And I think the main takeaway I had from that is that it doesn't matter what religion you are. It doesn't really matter what nation you are. You know, why are we, yes, we can have our disagreements. We can have different beliefs about God, about spirituality, about faith, about politics. And yeah, you know, with China and Taiwan, the United States. But you know what? In the end, we are all part of the human race. We are all human beings. We are all people worthy of love, worthy of respect. And that's the final thought I want to leave us with us today. And that's another edition of Everyday Faith. Thank you so much, and God bless.